Hi everyone, here is my interview with Sall Grover. I'm so pleased that I got to have a chance to talk with her about the Tickle versus Giggle case. It's such an important case and we need to basically spread the word about it, especially because we know that the media either tries to bury the news about it or tries to completely misrepresent the case. So hopefully this interview will give you all the information that you need. Before we get into it, don't forget to subscribe, like, share the video, leave a comment please, because that really boosts the algorithms. And if you'd like to support my channel and my efforts, then please consider becoming one of my patrons. Or if you prefer, send me some love via PayPal. Right, quick overview about the case, and then we'll jump right into the interview. Tickle V Giggle round 1. I've made an app for women.
Great, I've signed up.
You're a bloke.
I'm a woman. End of story.
Well, I'm kicking you off.
Well, I'm taking you to court.
Roxy Tickle is a legal lady woman and you are guilty of indirect discrimination.
Well, this is crazy. I will appeal. So, that's where we are. And here's our chat. Enjoy. So, hi Sall, how are you?
I'm so excited to talk to you because I haven't seen you since I was in London, so I'm very excited.
Well, the last time we met, you were drinking whiskey and I was drinking gravy.
Oh my God, totally. You arrived at a bar and I had already ordered a whiskey and a Yorkshire pudding and gravy. Yeah.
I was feeling absolutely shit that day and I just craved something hearty, and then when I smelt that gravy, I just had to drink it straight out the float.
Oh, it's just Yorkshire pudding. It's my one thing. Oh, I love it. I love it. It's the one thing I can cook as well because my mum's best friend is from Yorkshire and she taught me to cook them.
So, right, we don't have a great deal of time.
We don't, so let's get into it.
To the viewers, we're going to probably rush through things at quite a bit of a pace, but I want to try and cover as much as possible. And you must be bored talking about all this stuff now because you've been doing the rounds, for like over a week now?
No, to be honest, I mean, I'm bored of the entire issue. Yeah, I'm so bored. I couldn't be more bored of the entire issue. But in terms of this particular slice of it, I was very bored before the verdict because I was like, I have no verdict yet. I'm telling the same story. I don't know what else to say. I'm just waiting. Now, at least there is there's much more meat on the bone now because now in Australia, I mean, it's a situation of worst nightmares are confirmed. We knew that this was how they were interpreting the law. So we were, well, in terms of us preparing for worst case scenario.
Yes.
So now I can be like, well, everything we've been saying is true. It is the worst case scenario. They have literally eradicated the concept of biological sex in law. It doesn't exist. It has no weight in law. And what has weight in law is what you're always looking for in these sorts of cases. It has none. We know that now. We have some facts. We have the activists, they cannot deny it anymore. Let's go forward.
Yeah. The way I thought about it was this was like the legal boil that needed lancing.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, this is my life. Yeah.
What else can you do? Because as you say, now that there is no hiding from it, it is unmistakably true. If gender identity gets coded into law, that's the end of sex-based rights.
100%. And because, every country in the world that is grappling with this nonsense is very different to the UK. And I think a lot of people need to understand that we are dealing with completely different media. We're dealing with different laws. We're dealing with different politicians. We're also just in a different time with it. And I think that's a huge context for people to take into consideration. So we are not all in London going, you know what? It's basically done. We are so far away from that everywhere else. So that's a really important point.
It's a very important one, and we see it in the Netherlands as well. Obviously, I live on Turf Island, but in the Netherlands, sex was basically written out of law without taking the word out, right? It's just changing the meaning. So
it's exactly what happened. So I looked into it. So it's very similar. What has happened in the Netherlands and Australia are very similar. So what has happened is basically sex the word sex has not been taken out of law, but gender identity has been put into law to just replace it. And that's what I mean by gender identity then having more weight. It then replaces sex. It is the new sex. And that's what we're dealing with in Australia right now. So at this very moment in time, men who claim to be women, like, are women in Australia under law. They just are. But we knew that. But we did need confirmation that we knew that, because in Australia this law had never been challenged. So now we have that confirmation. And so now going forward, we very much have all the concrete evidence we need to be like, this law does not work at all. Let's get rid of it.
Yes. And similarly in the Netherlands, it's like the law, well, it's different, but it's ahead of the UK in terms of having completely destroyed what sex means in law. So that women and girls and homosexuals have no legal leg to stand on. So in terms of law, they're years ahead of the UK, but in terms of public awareness, they're years behind. Like, the way people talk about this in general is that nobody knows it's going on. The people who sort of know think it's just like a storm in a gender teacup somewhere else, and it doesn't affect everyone. Whereas when in 2014 there was an update to the Dutch constitution, which that part of the constitution is referred to as the transgender law, which again makes it sound like it's just over there somewhere and only affects a small group of people. But what it did was basically rewrite what sex means in law for every person in the country.
And that is such an important point, because what happens is when you replace sex-based laws, and Colin Wright, the biologist who was an expert witness on Tickle V Giggle, he did such a great tweet about it. And it, to me, summed up such an important point on the whole thing. If you've ever had, if you're a jurisdiction that has had, I'm paraphrasing him here, by the way, but if you've ever had sex as a protected characteristic in law, which most countries have had, or the good ones, you've done that on the basis of biological reality of sex. There's no other reason to do it otherwise. And so now to replace that with this concept of legal sex, because in countries like the Netherlands and in Australia, we have legal sex. So there's just no time to be had by like, oh, don't say biological sex, you just have to say sex. No. Actually, in Australia, we have to say biological sex, because if we just say sex, it will be interpreted by the powers that be as legal sex. We do not police our language on this, because, like, I know you're not going to, but I'm just saying this too.
No, I know this is a topic of debate, and I've said it myself before that, try to avoid saying biological sex because there's only one type of sex. But in terms of law, that's not how it works. And 100%. So I tend to use the word actual sex. But I mean, what coding gender identity into law does, it makes the female sex unisex.
100%. And it doesn't make the male sex unisex. I think this is really important, and I have absolutely no doubt it's playing out in the same way in the Netherlands. So when you have sex as a protected characteristic, because every single human being has a sex, we're all protected by that, right? So it just simply by sheer act of having sex as a protected characteristic, it will then trickle through law to actually adequately treat each sex or adhere to their problems as they are. Like, so in Australia, until we didn't have a Sex Discrimination Act until 1984. 1983 was the last year that women had to get their husbands or fathers to sign their passports so they would be allowed to get a passport. Like, so the moment like sex was a protected characteristic in law, suddenly there were rights, and they were proper rights, and they were equal rights, because the sex that needs that to be put into law is females, obviously, because well, we have all of human history to go by. And so, but what gender identity does is it throws in this bomb into sex-based law that should never, ever have been there in the first place, because it instantly creates a conflict. And then what it ignores is that, so even people who, let's just say there is an actual demographic of people who really don't like their sex and really don't feel it, or whatever it is the claim is, gender dysphoria, whatever, or autogynephilia, whichever end of the scale that is, they still actually require sex-based rights, all of these people, unless you're a man claiming to be a woman. So let me explain this. If you are a non-binary woman or even a trans man, so that's the same category of person under sex-based law, but if you throw gender identity into the mix, suddenly that category of person has just actually lost a lot of rights, because that category of person requires sex-based rights. It's how they play sport. It's how they go into female-only spaces, which most of them still do require. And then all of the other things like maternity law, all of the different other discrimination type laws that are within the Act. But then if you are, say, a male human being that claims to be non-binary, gender identity serves literally no purpose for you. It literally does no work in your life in terms of a legal standpoint, unless you're going under like a freedom of belief, but that's beyond the Sex Discrimination Act. So you're no better off. The only group in this whole thing that benefits is men who claim to be women, because putting gender identity into sex discrimination law and making biological sex obsolete literally allows those men to go and claim things that are for females, that are necessarily for females on the basis of biological reality. And by doing so, proves the biological reality of it and the legal necessity to protect it. Because the moment you don't protect it, they go in.
Yeah.
So the whole thing is a complete mess. So the moment you've put this into law, absolute mess. It has to be undone. Like, you have to undo it, and it takes a long time.
I want to have a look at the scale of that mess and how your case fits in with that. And also, how can it be undone? For example, can self-ID in Queensland be undone? But before we get into that, I just want to take you back to the morning of the verdict, which for me was midnight, and I was in a Twitter space. I'm dead naming. I was in an X space there were so many people there, and I think there were at least 1,000 people watching that judge give the verdict. What was the moment when you thought, fuck, lost?
Not even 20 seconds in, literally. Oh God, there's just so much. It was just such a crazy day. So I was with my dad. My dad comes with me to everything. I'm sure everyone's seen the photos. So I walked into the courtroom, and so there's two people that I need in that room, other than so Brady, my barrister, was not there. She was actually in another trial. And so Kath, my solicitor, was there. And so we arrived together. I was felt brilliant, the calming thing, you're there, you're with your people. And my dad, but I walked into the room and Rachel Wong wasn't there yet. And I just was like, oh my God, because Rachel Wong is one of the most calming human beings I've ever met in my entire life. Like, when she's around, you're just like, because she's so she's so elegant. Like, I also try not to swear around her. She makes me a better person.
Okay.
And so when I walked in and she wasn't there, and I had this thing, and I was like, oh God, Rachel's not here yet. And because she said she was coming. And so my dad and I just sat down. We actually technically really didn't sit down on the right side of the room. Like, we weren't behind Kath. We sat down at the table closest to the exit. And I was just the judge arrived and started reading his thing. And literally, not even 20 seconds in, he said he found the words cisgender and transgender useful. And I was like, well, that was a fucking waste of 18 months, wasn't it? What do you do? I mean, our whole argument was that they're not. But that comes, the judgment is I mean, it is what it is. But I mean, we're dealing with an activist judge who, which we suspected, but you're never going to. I'm not going to sort of project that onto somebody before, but if you have suspicions and then they're sort of confirmed, and it's not like a confirmation bias thing. It's actually, when you go through the judgment and you're like, what? I mean, really dismissed like our proper arguments, but I mean that's why you continue on. Bad judgments are easy to appeal, everyone. Let's just take a deep breath.
Well, who knows? He may have been wearing frilly knickers while he was delivering that verdict. But various people online have said stuff like, oh, well, don't blame the judge, or the judge can't help it, he has to follow the law. But surely there was a way for him to choose to interpret that law and to
yeah, so I mean, yes, there was. There is a total argument that the legislation is on our side. Obviously, we ran that argument. But when you have the Australian Human Rights Commission intervening in a case as amicus curiae, which is friend of the court, they're there to interpret the law. They have a statutory right to do it. Yep. So, I didn't have to grant them permission. So when there's different intervening things in a case, the different parties ask permission, and both sides can say yes or no. And then if it's at a stalemate, the judge can then decide. But it really wouldn't have mattered with the AHRC what each of us had said. They were going to intervene regardless. I said yes because I was like, bring it on, put it all on record. Because I mean, even just their application to intervene was so insane. I was like, please tell me more. Honestly, everyone, I've been saying this for 18 months. Everyone just go onto the federal court website and read what they said in their intervention to intervene and then their actual submission. I mean, these are 1984 level documents. They are so insane. And I just can't believe this is real life. But I never was like, oh, we're going to lose. I always thought 100% when you're in it to win it. But when you have the AHRC intervening and interpreting the law in the most insanely captured, bizarre way possible, that has weight. Again, we're talking weight. That has weight in federal court. In Federal Court of Appeal, a little less, because you're there going into appeal things and you're talking, it's a bit different. And then in High Court, totally different, because you're now then talking about the validity of the law.
Yes.
So it's different. So it was just, that was a barrier. No matter what I said, I could never have gotten past, because I couldn't say no to the AHRC. I may as well have ushered them in and say the stupidest things you can imagine, and they did.
Is there with this particular judge and the way he phrased this judgment, is that something that you can take to the High Court and then say, well, clearly this is an ideologically captured judge? Is that an argument you can use, or not?
No, that's not an argument. No, that specifically is not an argument. See, I think one of the things that's really important for people to understand is that when you're in a court case situation, you're not arguing you're not really arguing ideology, and you're not arguing sort of theory. You can't win a court case, say, with feminism, for example, or something like that. And as much as we can support all of these theories and we all agree with them when we're on Twitter or we're talking about them in interviews, but when you're actually in a court of law, you are just dealing with different sections of different acts, and then it's just arguments of why.
Yeah.
And you're trying to tether them to reality. So no, you can't go, oh, this is an ideologically captured judge, because that is a statement of opinion. And you can go, oh, well, here's the evidence. Why would you get, no, that's irrelevant at that point. You just go, these arguments or these judgments are wrong. And
right. So it's not about the judge and the person. It's about the boring gritty. How do you interpret the law? And what does the law say?
Completely. Exactly.
Right. Now, after the judgment, obviously, there was press coverage about it. And that press coverage in itself was like a 1984, script. where even the BBC, right? They said that you hold a belief that humans can't change sex. And it's like, well, wait a second. No, there are people who have the belief that you can change it, and you don't share the belief. But now you're made to be out.
Yeah.
Believer. Second, it then said that specific belief that you supposedly hold is a pillar of gender critical ideology. So not only does it say you have a particular belief, but you are an ideologue. Like everything's upside down.
It's gaslighting, man. It's gaslighting on the craziest scale, because also throughout this case, no matter what we have said it numerous times, the Australian Human Rights Commission has stated that Giggle, the provisions for using Giggle is that you had to look female. No, fucktards. You had to be female. Be.
Right.
Be.
And
that was it. You could literally be a female who looks like Buck Angel, but you could use it because literally you had to be female.
Yes.
I don't know how many more times I can say this.
And similarly, it's like they kept reporting on it as, oh, this is like a landmark transgender rights case. And it's like, it's a women's rights case. It's like, how many times do you have to say it? And there was a comment that you made, I think, when you spoke to Graham Linnen and, on the Mesra Inn, that anything that they would try to bury this case, as soon as possible. And if they don't, then they lie about it. So you're up against this stuff in court because he came after you, first of all. And then you're up against all the misinformation and the disinformation.
100%. I mean, I think that's one of the things, like, especially in the aftermath of this verdict, like, I understand that a lot of women are really disappointed. Like, I get it. Like, I mean, today is actually one of the first days I felt relatively normal since it. Like, I didn't have to do much this morning. So my daughter and I just laid in bed this morning and watched Bluey until 11 a.m. And it was the first time in the last 3 weeks I've been able to do that. So it was really, really nice. And I just needed, that chicken soup for the soul. I just needed to just give my brain and emotions a break and just you ground yourself and you just chill out.
Especially dealing with this, you need liters of chicken soup for the soul.
Yeah, it's just been and it's just been crazy. And it's just we are dealing with complete and utter insanity. And we just have to remember that there's a lot of people out there who don't understand the issue yet. The majority of people do not understand what is actually happening.
Yeah. And
so that is the biggest obstacle that we have in terms of, say, the court of public opinion. We have to be able to reach them. This is not a Twitter fight. I'm not here for a Twitter fight. I'm here to.
You're very good on Twitter, though. It's like with that senator going, oh, the poor women and girls in Afghanistan. And you're like, well, why don't you just let them identify out of it?
But in part why I'm good on Twitter is because I don't get involved in Twitter spats, especially with people on my own side. I have no interest in it. And I think that because I'm just literally, I'm out here fighting if you boil it down to the essence, I'm out here fighting for fact, truth, reason, freedom of speech, freedom of belief. Women's rights will come from that on this issue, not in history, but on this issue they will. And obviously we'll fight to make sure women have rights, in case there was something that happened that didn't.
I think that's a really important point because in terms of when you look at the scale of the madness in Australia, particularly, you've got, that women's football team or soccer team with 5 blokes in it. You've got that bloke at least he's in a men's prison, but he's reported as a female pedophile in the press. And he's now accused of running that child abuse ring from prison. Ooh. And then they show a picture of him and it's a bloke with a beard.
Can I say something on that, though? Because that came out just after the Tickle V Giggle verdict. And I've done research on this. And actually, per capita, Australia actually has the highest rate of men who claim to be women in women's prisons. So I was like, so why the fuck is this woman not in there? Because in light of Tickle V Giggle, that's a woman. Why is that woman in a male-only space? Because again, no one, even the trans side, they're not opposed to single-sex spaces. They're just saying these males are female. That's what we're dealing with. Like, we don't have to sit there and justify female-only spaces per se. We do in the sense that you have to explain to people that we will self-exclude from them. Women will self-exclude from them. But in terms of like just the necessity of female-only spaces, they're not actually debating that.
Yeah,
They're
as long as you say that men can be females in those spaces.
Right, totally. So when that horror, I think it's Jessica Rose, he calls himself. Dean Bell is his name. Yeah. That guy, I'm just like, well, tell me why he's not in a female prison. Like, obviously I don't want him to be in one, but I'm like, why isn't? Because what is this picking and choosing? I'm like, I'm sorry. Do you, the government, see an absolute danger here? Are you safeguarding? Are you setting boundaries? Well, why the fuck can't the rest of us?
Yeah. Or actually, are you discriminating?
Well, exactly. I'm sorry. Are you discriminating on the basis of gender identity?
Because
I've got a story to tell you about that. You're going to owe him 10 grand.
Well, another thing you said is like, standing up for women's rights now a form of discrimination, and this is what we're seeing in the Netherlands as well, where you cannot discriminate on the basis of sex, right? But sex in the Netherlands includes so-called gender identity and sex characteristics. So if you have a bloke with his dick out in a women's changing room, but legally he's so-called female, then you can't say that he shouldn't be in that space. And if he's got his cock out, then you can't say, well, but she has a penis, because a penis is a sex characteristic and you can't discriminate on that basis. Even in the exemptions for sex discrimination, it includes gender. So because when you include gender, it neuters the meaning of sex.
Right. It's exactly the situation that we're in. So basically, like, you can't just go in there, like, even with this, and run a case of just exemptions, because legally this person is female. So if this person is legally female, this male is legally female, there is no argument for me trying to legally exclude this female from a female in this space. Think of it as an extension of the pronouns thing. Like, we say you have to use correct pronouns, not preferred pronouns, because otherwise then you're in this position of saying, if you call a man she, then you have to explain why you don't want that she in a female in this space. And the entire condition you don't is because he's a he. So it's the same thing here. We're in this situation in Australian law and in Dutch law where we're told that we have to include these males in female spaces because they're female. However, they're not female.
Yeah.
And so we have to be, so you don't go in there and validate that. You go in there and you explain why they're not female.
Right. Because also, if you were to get any exemptions, like even in the UK where, we've got the Equality Act and there's exemptions there, there's still exemptions. It's like you still have to sort of crawl on the floor for crumbs instead of just having your actual sex recognized as a legal. I mean, basically women, in this case, particularly women and girls, have lost the right to their own sex class.
No, completely. This is also the thing of why I'm not a fan of doing any sort of argument that's just can we just have like exemptions? That would mean that any woman in Australia if this was something that happened in the world, that you have to go and ask the government for permission if you want to do something just for women. No, not asking for permission. No.
Right.
No.
Because then it would make the madness the default, and then you can have a little exemption of a safe sanitary space, which is mad.
I understand stepping stones in building to something. I understand that there can be like something in that, but just absolutely no way is that the win that we want, because literally this in Australia, the Sex Discrimination Act, before gender identity was put in it was the exemption. We didn't have to ask permission. Mm-hmm. So it would be taking us back to a era before the act even came in 1984. Like, I was born in 1984. This is 40 years ago. So,
Yeah, yeah.
no, I do not want a situation where women have to ask for permission. I am saying that we literally exist as a sex class, women, females, women and girls. We are a sex class. No males, man, boy, can identify into it.
Mm-hmm.
That's it. That's my fucking bottom line.
So
Bam.
they could legislate for the moon being made out of cream cheese, but
Totally.
it doesn't mean it's made. And
Well,
just to go back to sort of the scale of the madness, right? So obviously there's a judgment in Tickle versus Giggle. Then there's, you know, blokes on women's football teams and smashing, you know, all the games. There's blokes in women's prisons. There's a tribunal happening right now about a lesbian having to sort of, and there's something so humiliating about it. A lesbian is at a tribunal and she has to justify that lesbians are a thing and that they deserve rights. And
I
in
think
Germany, go on.
I think it's humiliating on the Australian Human Rights Commission part. I don't think it's humiliating to the Lesbian Action Group. I think they're incredibly brave. I am put pressure on these people. Like, all power to you, like all credit to you for doing this, because they could have set this out. They could have just gone, this is too hard.
But so you could have set it out, but you said, I won't. And I've got so many more questions, but we're running out of time.
Keep going. You've got 6 minutes. Go.
Okay, now. Okay, so what if you sort of look back on you know, I'm not saying you're old, but if you look back on your life, what are the things that, like, experiences or people that you've met and worked with or been friends with that have shaped you to be able to take this on, and that made you the type of person that didn't want to just sit it out?
Without a doubt, it's my dad. I don't even have to think about it. It's my dad. I was raised. My dad. Oh gosh, and don't get me wrong. Like, we've locked heads many a times in, like, being raised by him. He was never easy on me. It was like, you know, it was, you know, don't tell me what you feel, tell me what you think. He would always make me think. It was question everything. He was always, but he was just like encouraging me, like, do better, do better. And like we've talked since, and he was just like, hey, he's like, yeah, I knew you could handle it. Like, you saw something. He was like, I saw that you were someone who, you know, you just had to be sort of, you know, guided in that way. And I'm don't get me wrong, I'm pleased he did. I was not raised by yes people, that's for sure. To this day, if I vape while doing an interview, as soon as it comes out, my mum texts me going, stop vaping in interviews.
What was one of the, especially in the last 2-3 years, what's a piece of advice where you're like, I must remember that?
Piece of advice I have to remember. Don't let litigation consume you. Like, this can't be your life.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, fighting for women's rights has become my life, without a doubt. Because, I mean, I got swept into this in 2020. It's that has utterly consumed it. But don't let litigation. I only learned this phrase last week. They alerted me to it, and I've done so much research since. It's called litigation psychosis, that some people actually go crazy from the process of litigation, because this is painful. It's horrible. I wouldn't wish this upon my worst enemy. I don't think I'd take my worst enemy to litigation because of how horrible it is.
Yeah.
And so it's just, you stay calm, you know what's in your control and what's out of your control. And I mean, I feel I'm in a unique situation here because of the nature of this case. I'm just like, I know beyond reasonable doubt that I have fact and fucking reality on my side. Mm-hmm. This person is male. This person is a man. I don't care what he calls himself. He can call himself whatever he wants. All power to you. I wish you well. You're not a woman in any realistic way.
What do you think about these men? Like, this is the same kind of men that we see in Canada, in the Netherlands, and obviously with Tickle, that they must have everything, right? They're arrogant. Is it arrogance? Is it narcissism? Like, what is it that they, one, can't take no for an answer, and two, like you said with in your chat with Megan Murphy, it's like, women are always being asked, why can't you just accept them as a woman? And your response was, well, why can't they just accept that they're not women? Like, what is it about these men?
Yeah. Well, it's like how we're always told, like, it's happened in the last week, some politicians in Australia where they've been questioned over Tickle V Giggle, and they're like, I don't want to get involved in a culture war. And it's like, well, you had no problem getting involved in one when you voted for the amendments. I mean, you started it. I'm just here to finish it.
Right.
So don't give me your I don't want to get involved in a culture war arguments.
But again, that's just the way to brush it aside as a culture war, and not as,
It's not a culture war at all. No. This is not a culture war. This is a rights conflict in legislation that needs to be fixed. It's as simple as that. Like, you can personally have the belief that men are women. I'm not going to stop you. I'm all for freedom of belief. Believe whatever crazy crap you want. As long as it doesn't impact me, I don't really care. And so I think that, hopefully, like, what is happening in Australia right now and what has needed to happen for a really long time is we're getting to this point, that tipping point that happened in the UK years ago, where the politicians can't ignore it anymore. They've been able to ignore this for so long because we have Sky News, which is basically our ally. Sometimes the Australian will occasionally do an article, but it's so hard. We don't have the diversity of media the UK has. The UK has so much media. We don't. We are working with what we've got, and it's hard. But we'll get there in the end. I have no doubt we'll win this in the end. I have no doubt.
There was one thing you said before we started recording, which is about I want to make them regret it. Can you tell me a bit more about that?
What did I say? Gosh, I can't remember what I said. No, I mean, I know what. I can tell you the context of what I mean. This is not to anyone personally. I want the Australian Human Rights Commission. I want them to be beyond humiliated. I actually think it needs to be disbanded, and I think it needs to actually, if there is a need for a human rights commission, which sure I can be convinced of any argument that there is. Like I'm sure there are arguments that there needs to be one, but the one that exists at the moment is not it. Specifically, the Sex Discrimination Commission, which is a thing within it. They have been utterly corrupted by gender ideology, which is, of course, because that's where they all went to. That's how they infiltrated it. They also lobbied for gender identity to be in the Sex Discrimination Act, incidentally, in case you were wondering if there was any conflict of interest at any point. No, they're not fit for purpose. I have no interest in this organization has never once considered the fact that I have human rights too, and by extension, all other women or anyone else who doesn't, any man who doesn't believe in gender ideology, that we have human rights, not once. And we're seeing it play out in the last 2 days with Lesbian Action Group. They're not once considering that lesbians have rights over men who claim to be women. They are utterly captured by gender ideology. So if you're captured by an ideology, as an Australian Human Rights Commission who's supposed to represent all Australians, you're not fit for purpose. If it was up to me, the only people who'd be left there are the cleaners and maybe the desks.
So what are the next steps? Do you have to first apply to be allowed to appeal?
So no. So the first step is, we always were waiting for the judgment to find out if this was a necessary step. So the first step, we're going to the full bench of the federal court. We are going to be going to that. So we appealed to the federal court first. It's a necessary step. The appeal hasn't happened yet, so I haven't been given the full brief of exactly everything, so I can't comment more. I've been given the very basic thing, and I'm always told this by all the legal team. They say it to me, and I remember it at the time. I'm like, that makes total sense. And then when I have to express it as someone who's not a legal expert, I'm like, bleh.
Okay.
Basically, you just, if any sort of facts that are in dispute, and there are facts that are in dispute in this case, it was a bad judgment. So you have to go to the full bench of the federal court. The High Court in Australia.
Does that mean a whole bunch of judges rather than one?
Yeah, it does. And I mean, this case is always too much for one judge. It really was. Like, to be fair, like I don't hold it against him in that respect. But yeah, so we go to the full bench of the federal court. That will happen probably in the beginning of next year sometime. It's just one day. And then from there'll be a judgment from there. So, I mean, there is a possibility that the full bench of the federal court goes, yeah, you guys are right.
Okay.
There's a total possibility that happens because we are. We are. So it's totally plausible. But, I'm just always preparing for worst case scenario. So worst case scenario is they say, no, we'll just side with the full bench. We'll just side with the federal court. This won't be a federal court matter. Go to the high court. The high court is an error in law court. It's where you deal with issues in the Constitution / legislation, which is the crux of this case, because this is a case where there is an issue with legislation. So that's why I've always been told from the very beginning that the chances of this ending up in the high court are so high, because at the end of the day, it's legislation. And
that will give it much bigger exposure, or that will be a case that will be much harder to ignore, I guess, by the press.
Yeah, definitely. Oh God, I wouldn't put it past the Australian press to ignore it. But what it would give us, either way, there would be a mandate that would be created to put pressure on Australians, especially if there was political, like if people in Australia knew about it and started caring about it, it would be really significant. But say if you went in the high court, they say to legislators, you have to, we recommend you repeal these. And then you've got a mandate to do it. And then we can get them repealed. No legislators are going to repeal the laws that are in Australia or the Netherlands without any judicial pressure to do so. It's just the reality we're in.
And this is why it's so important that you are doing what you're doing, because, as you say, it's not like politicians are looking at this case and suddenly going to go, oh, let's change the law.
Oh, totally. There's literally, I mean, there's not a single powerful politician that a week and a half ago, whatever it was, that went, oh, we've got to go and fix that. They were like, oh, yeah, there would be some that probably would have gone, well, that's stupid. But they're not. Until there is actual constituents pushing back on them in a meaningful way. Like, we are this grassroots group of women. We are from the bottom up, we are not dealing with institutional power here.
No.
So, getting and don't get me wrong, I support it. We stand on the court steps. We stand on the steps of Parliament. We hold signs. We say the truth. But the change is going to come from within those rooms. And so as many people that can take the cases need to do it, because it's the pressure. Yeah. In Australia, I'm just the first to challenge the Sex Discrimination Act like this and these amendments. And hopefully this can be the one that can fix it. And then we don't have to go on any further. But in the absolute horror event that I'm not, it's going to take someone else.
Yeah.
How long are we going to wait for that person? Because it's just, who's it going to be? Because there's not many female-only spaces. They've all fallen to it.
Yes, and there's not many.
I don't know who it's going to be to challenge the law, and we're just not going to get political capital to get them to repeal it. It's just like the female-only gyms, the independent female-only gyms. They can't. They can't do it, or they won't. They've just fallen. They've just gone, okay, well, we'll just deal with this guy, with one or two guys that come in and try and get our women. All the women are going, oh, now, okay, I've had to reset my boundaries. Female-only schools in Australia, they'll all get by on a religious exemption to some extent. I mean, in terms of just being able to have female-only spaces, from bathrooms to change rooms to prisons to apps, you have to challenge the law to do it so that everything else can follow through.
Yeah.
Trying my absolute best to get that to happen.
Well, I want to thank you for, it all sounds so cliche. Thank you for everything you've done, but
thank you.
You could have set it out. You could have just done, okay, never mind, I'll do something else.
No, I couldn't, because you know what? It's not even about a business. I'm a woman. By the time I got this, the AHRC complaint, I was pregnant. Then I found out I was having a girl. I mean, even if I was having a boy, it wouldn't have made any difference. But like, oh, maybe, no, it wouldn't have. No, like, I'm a woman. I want rights. I want my daughter to have rights. Like, this matters to me.
So, there's so much more I would have liked to have asked you.
I'm so sorry. I have to go. I've got 2 more interviews that I'm actually doing.
I know, but again, it's like you've had this judgment and you just keep going. And I hope that in between, there's plenty of time for chicken soup of the soul whenever you need it. Thank you so much.
It's going to be another 18 months, like 15 to 18 months. It's going to be a long time. By the time, like this started when I was 15 weeks pregnant with Belle. She'll be about 3.5 by the time this has ended.
Like during the case, you've popped out a baby, so to speak, and this man has had his dick inverted, and somehow you're just as much of a woman. My last question then is, how can we help? Obviously, support the crowdfunder. So I'll put a link in the video description. The other thing is, go on.
That's basically it. Like, and spreading the word. Like, no, spreading the word is the most important thing. People understanding what's happening. That's where you can then get, just MPs inundated with things and going, okay, hang on, this might be an issue we can't ignore. So there's a lot that people can do.
Do you have a sort of an elevator pitch where you're like, look, guys, talk about this case. This is the best way to do it.
Yeah, it's the what is a woman case. Basically, a man who claims to be a woman wanted to go into a woman's only space. The woman said no. And a federal court said that the man who claims to be a woman has more rights than the woman.
Mm-hmm. That is mad. Because last night I was outside at 3 a.m. because there were guys being boisterous outside and they were smoking spliffs and they were high, whatever. So I just went downstairs to see what was going on. And then I ended up telling them all about Tickle V Giggle, which made me giggle in a stupid sort of high kind of way with bloodshot eyes. Whether anything stuck, I don't know. But I'm talking about this at any given opportunity. And in a way, it's helpful that, the optics of, you versus Roxy. I mean, it's a good thing that he's just a bloke, right? It's just so obvious to everyone.
This is the thing. This is what it comes down to. I don't even remember seeing him. I don't even remember the day it happened, but I would have seen a man because literally same with everyone who's seeing his photo.
Yeah. There was one Australian account on Twitter that described this whole thing as a fully expenses paid power trip for narcissistic men. I think that kind of sums it up. Yeah, I mean, I think that's actually what gender ideology is, to be honest. Yeah. You don't even have to go to one person with it. That is the whole thing about gender ideology. It is allowing these men to have power and privilege over women while simultaneously taking away our rights. So the divide actually gets further. Mm. And we're then just being gaslit by everyone else, that we're the crazy ones, all in the name of of the oppressed who are actually the powerful ones. And it's just like, how are you guys not seeing this? Everything's upside down.
The easiest way for a straight white guy to not have the privilege of being a straight white guy is to just call himself a woman. That is the most insulting thing I've ever heard to literally everyone, not just women. It's like insulting to everyone. But like, how are people? I honestly, like, anyone who's believed this at this point, like, I've been very charitable for a long time, but at this point, I'm like, you're a fucking idiot. Like, if someone believes this and they're like a surgeon, don't touch me with a scalpel. I don't trust you. Yeah. If you're an accountant who believes it, I don't want you anywhere near me. Literally, I don't think if someone believed in this and they were like collecting my garbage, I'd be like, you know what? How do you know the difference between just regular and recycling if categories don't matter anymore? I'd just be like, if you cannot acknowledge this basic fact of reality that men are men and women are women, and literally nothing else has to flow from that. But that is just a fact. I trust you with nothing else.
Yes, and this was somebody made a meme out of you saying that, so I'll put that up. Because again, it's like if I can't trust you about this, then what else can I trust you about? Thank you so much, and good luck. And I'll be spreading the word where I can, and hopefully with this interview on my channel, it will make a little bit of a difference as well.
Oh, thank you so much. I love you. I love your channel so much. I just love it, love it, love it. Just please, just keep doing it. I love it. Mwah, mwah. I love it.
Thank you so much for watching, and thank you to my PayPal and Patreon supporters. Because of you, I can make videos like this. Special shout out to my big spenders. Help Her Open, Mama Turv and the Turventines, Me Julie, The Lovely Mary, Julia, Dusty, Judels, Leffy, Dorothy, Wildfire, Esther, and Martha. Thank you.